How do people measure their stress tolerance, or is it worth measuring your stress tolerance and having an understanding? Does that help with someone's awareness and their propensity towards burnout or resilience?
Yeah. So there's different ways to measure different aspects of stress. It depends how you define it, of course. But you can measure things like heart rate variability. That's a way to measure kind of indirectly to measure vagal tone. Um, you can do things like genetic tests to see what genes you carry. There's functional medicine testing that can look at cortisol rhythms, the stress hormone in your blood and your saliva, and how that changes over a 24-hour period. So there's certain patterns when I do someone's cortisol testing, if they're not peaking the cortisol the right time of day, for example, or they don't have a nice uptick after they get up, a nice little burst, then we know the stress tolerance is lower than it maybe it could be. Um, so these tests can be helpful if you're treating someone because you understand where they're at right now. The genetic side of the test can also be helpful for helping people remove the guilt and shame around why can't I just sleep 6 hours like my other colleagues? Why do I need more rest? Why am I more sensitive to stress? Because a lot of people feel a lot of guilt around these things. Um, I know myself, I need 9 hours of sleep a night. I definitely have to work harder than average. I don't drink any alcohol. I live a very healthy lifestyle and I have to really manage my stress. And when I do that, I generally feel good. But I do a lot of things in order to do that. So I'm probably on that lower end genetically of that spectrum. And I've just accepted it. It's okay. But when I was younger and you're in medical school and you're working insane hours, I had friends who were just able to cope on 4 hours a night of sleep for months at a time. And I just felt absolutely awful and got sick all the time. And, so everyone's just different.
Mm,
Yeah, I like
wow.
that. That really does kind of lean into the diversity, and that some are you designed for different functions in society by their very makeup.
Yerkes and Dodson were two scientists that invented this stress response curve. They discovered it over 100 years ago. So we've known about this for a really long time, but it's still not really, I don't feel, well integrated, this concept into Western medicine. So what this law says is basically exactly like you described. You have a certain amount of stress that is healthy because it challenges the body in a healthy way. But once you tip over into too much stress, it becomes negative. And the tipping point is when the stress becomes overwhelming for the body and the brain. And that is different for each of us. So, I always tell patients it is unfair because you will know people who can, sleep for 6 hours, eat unhealthily, drink alcohol more than you should, and they never get sick. They're good. We all know these people. There's not a lot of them, but they do exist. And then I have some patients who, have to sleep 9 hours a night. They can't drink alcohol. They have to be very, very healthy to just feel quote unquote normal. So everyone's stress tolerance is different. But the good thing is you can shift your stress tolerance as well. You can shift it. So it depends on the biological factors that you have that are contributing to your stress tolerance. Is there environmental toxin exposures that you can reduce? If there's a variety of things we can do. Is your vagal tone low, like we talked about earlier? So there's ways we can shift this curve, but starting where your current curve is important.
Yeah,
Wow.
like one thing I was doing some research for this podcast, and one of the keys to resilience, you spoke about some softer things like compassion,
Yeah.
gratitude, flexibility, and that doesn't mean like being able to touch your toes, but the ability to
So,
be adapt to your environment as opposed to be rigid and stuck. And I have to do that now.
yes, exactly. And if you talk to people who live to 100, these are some themes that come up. They usually are quite grateful for what they have, even if they don't have a lot. They're usually quite flexible, thinking. And these things are good for our brain, you see, because these decrease stress in the brain. When we're able to be flexible, the brain feels less stress and less bad stress, less negative stress. And these are traits that we can all cultivate. So some people are naturally more flexible. It's just the way it is. Some people are naturally, it's easier for them to practice gratitude and compassion meditations. But everyone can learn how to do these. These are brain skills anyone can learn. That's the good news.
Yeah, how does one work on being more adaptable or being more flexible in that way in terms of their day to day life? Because some people naturally are they find it easier to be in flow, or they seem like they're in flow. And some people,
Or even I was going to say, like, we have a
Yeah.
business, and when you've got different members of the team, you need
Yeah.
different skill sets. And I know
Yeah.
we're quite chaotic. Like, when chaos prevails, that's when we kind of come to life. Like, oh yes, right. This whereas other people in our team are just so risk averse, and so which you absolutely need to balance it, and they really don't
Yeah.
want chaos at all. So it's different people are, I think, almost by nature have a different
Yes.
stress
Absolutely.
tolerance.
Absolutely. So I think the first part is just, accepting that, diversity is amazing, and everyone is, does have their own set point for these things. You can practice being more flexible in little ways. If someone's 5 minutes late, trying to just have a few deep breaths, and just instead of thinking, oh, I can't believe they're late again,
I'm
think,
going to bite their
you
head
know
off
what?
when they arrive.
Exactly. Yeah. Just like, you know what? It's okay. I don't have to account for every moment. And, there's all kinds of little compassion practices you can do, self-compassion practices. I feel that sometimes flexibility starts with self-compassion in a lot of senses, because if we're more compassionate to ourselves, it's easier to give other people some slack. So there's really simple compassion meditations you can do. There's loads online. UCLA has a lot of great. They have an app now. Their UCLA mindfulness app is fantastic. So sometimes I tell patients, just put on a recording and just listen to one of these meditations a few minutes a day, and just a little bit every day can make a difference.
Well, I certainly know in my experience of having children, that's been the greatest greatest catalyst to becoming more flexible, because
Definitely.
you can be very focused. Certainly, I look at myself in my late 20s and before having kids at 30. I'm very whatever, and then having kids, it just, whether you want to or not, you just have to become very flexible, because your children's
Yeah.
needs typically become ahead of yours
Exactly.
when they're little anyway.
It's so true.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, I absolutely find the same thing. And you just have to let things go, and you have to learn how to pick your battles. And it's a beautiful journey. I feel exactly the same since I've become a mom. Yeah.